Good morning, folks. Thank you for coming to be with us while we update you about this horrific event. I'm joined today, as you know, by our awesome Superintendent Jackie Bird of the school system and Deputy Quintana, who had a very important role in this investigation yesterday afternoon. But let me start by giving you the events up to this date. It started as a typical Thursday afternoon. The children from the middle school got off of the school bus and the school bus drove away. Deputy Quintana's 11-year-old daughter had called him on the phone and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm off the bus. Would you come pick me up?" And he said, "Sure." And about that time, the 11-year-old starts screaming into the phone, telling her dad that some kids had been injured, had been run over by a car. Deputy Quintana ran down to the site of the crash, saw two kids significantly injured, ran back to his house to get his patrol car, and came back to provide first aid until EMS arrived. He saw that there were some nurses on scene, and a witness said the suspect's down the road. He drove down the road and took the suspect successfully into custody after he crashed into another vehicle and injured a lady who was 4 months pregnant. What we learned as soon as we got control of the situation, there wasn't just 2 children injured, there were 5. This drunk man in this car drove off of the road and ran through these children and scattered them like a bowling ball through bowling pins. Then he left the scene. And as he got down the road a ways, he had another crash and injured the lady that was pregnant. He was taken into custody. Deputy Quintana, upon taking him into custody, told him, he said, "Do you know what you did?" And he said, "Well, I ran into this car." And he said, "No, you just run over 2 kids. He said, "Well, if I did, then just shoot me." But let's talk about the suspect, John Camfield. They know him as Cam. He spent 18 years in law enforcement in the state of Mississippi. He had an alcohol problem. I talked to one of the sheriffs that he worked for. He worked for police departments and sheriff's offices. And the sheriff said, "I've been in law enforcement a long time, and he was one of the very best detectives we ever had. He was an awesome interviewer. He knew how to put together good criminal cases." But he had a problem. Alcohol, the bottle. We checked, we found out that he's worked for 10 different law enforcement agencies in Mississippi between 1994 and 2012, when his career ended. He used to brag that John Camfield said that he and Captain Morgan's had a special relationship. Rum was his drink of choice. The detective started the investigation. He refused the breathalyzer test. As the investigation was ongoing, he was critiquing the traffic homicide detectives. He was critiquing their steps that they were taking and complimenting them that you guys know what you're doing around here. He refused the blood draw, so we obtained a search warrant. We had him down at the jail, and he was kind of lighthearted about all this. And Greg Gorick, who is our lieutenant, knew him because after he came here, he was at one time the director of public safety for the old Cypress Gardens. And Greg said, "Cam, you don't seem to understand what's going on here. You ran over 5 kids. And one of them is exceptionally critical condition. We don't know if he's going to survive. And he said, well, if that's the case, just put me under the jail. He then agreed to a breathalyzer in addition to the blood draw, and 7 hours after the crash, he still read a .14, almost double the limit. 7 hours after the crash. Well, John Camfield's right. We didn't put him under the jail, but we put him into the jail, and our goal is that he never, ever, ever gets a chance to drive a car or walk around a free person again. As of this morning, the hospital has informed our traffic homicide folks that they don't see any way that Jaheim Robertson, who is only 13 years old, can survive his injuries. Juan Mina, who is 13 years old, was struck and has significant injuries, has a lot of broken bones in his face, but they expect him to recover. Then there's Jonte Robinson, who's 15 years old. He was slightly injured, treated, and released at the scene. Jasmine Robertson, who is 14 years old. Jonte Robinson and Jasmine Robertson. And Jasmine Robertson is the sister to Jaheim Robertson, who is very, very, very critical. And Ryan Price was also injured. So 3 were treated at the scene and released. 2 are currently at Arnold Palmer being treated for some significant issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we work traffic fatalities frequently. Last year, I think we worked 80 different traffic fatalities in the unincorporated area of Polk County alone. And every one of them are tragic. But not one of them last year rises to the level of the total disregard for human life that John Camfield created when he drove totally drunk, totally reckless, totally out of control, and run over those children. That could have been your children or my children or grandchildren. Millions of children across this nation yesterday afternoon and this morning and this afternoon are going to be standing beside the roadway to get onto or off of a public school bus. And these kids weren't in the road. They weren't misbehaving. They weren't cutting up. They were just being middle school children on their way home. Jaheim didn't make it home, and Juan didn't make it home. Now, before the superintendent, who was out most of the night and was back at the schools early this morning, talks to you, I want you to hear from Deputy Quintana. If you notice when he walked in the room, he doesn't normally walk like that, but he can testify after you run a few blocks barefooted that it's kind of rough on your feet. So we're not even going to let him work tonight as much as he wants to. He's got to go home and heal up a little bit himself. But he did what a deputy should do, and he certainly did what every father should do. Tell him what you know.
Yes, sir, Sheriff. Thank you. How you doing? Yesterday, I received a phone call from my daughter, as I always do. When she gets off the bus, we have a routine. She calls me to make sure that I'm home and that I'm going to be able to go pick her up or watch her walk to the house. As I was talking to her yesterday, she asked me to pick her up. I was in bed. I said, okay. Literally about 3 seconds later, she starts screaming frantically, Dad, help me. Dad, I need your help. And I assumed the worst. I got out of my bed and I ran towards my daughter, not knowing what was going on. She, as soon as I get closer to her, I notice that she's up and she's okay. I go up to her and I ask her what happened. She said, Dad, the neighbor and my friend got hit by a black car. I was like, okay, at which point I switched from being a father to doing my job. I assessed the situation. I saw that the two kids were pretty injured. I noticed that one of the kids was bleeding profusely through his face. I asked him to sit down, at which point other parents arrived on scene, and I ran back to my home where my patrol car was located. I grabbed my car because inside the trunk we carry our first aid kit. As I got home, I didn't have any shoes. I yell at my wife, ask her to give me some shoes. She throws me some sandals and the keys to my patrol car, and I immediately go back to the scene. Soon as I made it back to the scene, I observed that there was a nurse. There was two nurses on scene, one on each child, trying to treat them. One of the people that were there, I didn't catch her name. She advised me that the guy that did it was down the road. I then get back into my vehicle and I drive up to where he was supposed to be located. As soon as I get on into the road, I observed that the vehicle had crashed into another vehicle and the driver had stumbled out of the vehicle. I parked right behind the vehicle with my emergency lights on, and I immediately detained the subject, the suspect of the vehicle crash. Once I did that, I advised our dispatchers that the subject was detained and that we needed additional rescue services for the female that was on scene. I then waited on scene. An officer from Winter Haven arrived. He assisted me with traffic control and allowed me to sit down for a little bit because my feet were hurting a little bit at that time. At which point, traffic units arrived and they assumed the investigation. They assumed my part of it and took the subject into their custody, and I was relieved.